The cantina on Meridian Prime buzzed with the sounds of a dozen different species talking, drinking, and making deals. Smoke from exotic pipes drifted through the air while strange music played from hidden speakers. In the darkest corner of the bar sat Commander Zexthara, his forearms wrapped around a glass of something that glowed blue in the dim light. The Catherian looked like nothing else in the galaxy. His body stood 8 feet tall when he bothered to straighten up, covered in crystalline plates that had once been pure white but now showed the scars of countless battles. Deep gouges ran across his chest where plasma bolts had found their mark. One of his forearms moved slower than the others, damaged in a fight he tried not to remember. His large compound eyes reflected the bar lights like broken mirrors. 3 young cadets walked over to his table. The first was a Zilani, all green skin and confidence. The second was a Hydrax with blue scales that sparkled under the lights. The third was a Morthan, covered in the thick fur that kept his kind warm on their ice world. They had been drinking for hours and felt brave enough to bother the old warrior. "Tell us a story, old-timer," the Zilani said, pulling up a chair without being invited. "We heard you fought in the Proxima Wars." Zexthara looked at them with eyes that had seen too much. He took a long drink from his glass before speaking. "You want stories? There are many wars to choose from. Which one interests you?" The Hydrax laughed and slammed his fist on the table. "Tell us about fighting the humans. Everyone says they are weak. Soft mammals who only joined the galaxy 5 years ago. How hard could it be to beat them?" The other cadets laughed along. They had heard the stories about humans from their teachers at the academy. Slow creatures who live short lives on a small blue planet. No natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities like the other races. Just pink skin and basic tools. Zexthara set down his glass and studied each of the young aliens carefully. "You think humans are weak?" "Of course," the Morthan said, his voice muffled by his thick snout. "They have no claws, no poison, no energy weapons built into their bodies. They cannot even see in the dark properly. What could they possibly do? Against real warriors?" The old Catherian's mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement. "I commanded 3 full battle groups during the Proxima border conflict. 15,000 of the best-trained soldiers in the Catherian Defense Force. We had ships that could crack planets, weapons that could melt steel from orbit, and armor that had never been pierced by any known weapon." He paused to take another drink. "By the end of the war, less than half of my soldiers made it home. The rest are buried on worlds whose names I try to forget." The cadets stopped laughing. The Zilani leaned forward. "What happened?" "We learned that there are different kinds of strength," Zexthara said quietly. "We learned that evolution creates more than just claws and armor. Sometimes it creates something much worse." The bar seemed to grow quieter around them. Other patrons had stopped talking to listen to the old warrior's words. Zexthara had fought in more wars than any living soldier. In the galaxy? When he spoke about battle, people listened. "I will tell you about humans," he continued. "But I warn you now that what you learn tonight will change how you see the galaxy. You will understand why the Council of Worlds voted to offer humans full membership after only 5 years of contact. You will know why experienced admirals resign rather than face human forces in battle. You will learn why the phrase human tactics makes even the bravest warriors check their weapons twice." The Hydrax shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You are just trying to scare us? Humans are new to space. They barely have any ships. How dangerous could they be?" Zexthara's eyes focused on something far away, remembering battles fought on distant worlds. "The first time I encountered human forces, I commanded the advanced scout fleet for the 3rd Catherian Expeditionary Army. We had been ordered to secure the Kepler mining colonies that the humans claimed belonged to them. Simple mission: drive off some primitive mammals and claim the resources for the Empire." He stood up slowly, his damaged arm hanging at his side. "I brought 40 ships and 2,000 soldiers to fight what our intelligence said was a small human garrison, maybe 100 defenders with basic weapons. We expected to finish the job in a few hours and be home for victory celebrations. The cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the music had stopped playing. Every species in the bar had heard rumors about the Proxima Wars, but few had ever heard a first-hand account from someone who survived them. The battle lasted 6 weeks, Zexthara said, his voice barely above a whisper. When it ended, I had 7 ships left and fewer than 300 soldiers who could still fight. The humans had not lost a single defender. The cadets stared at him in disbelief. The Morthan shook his furry head. That is impossible. You must be exaggerating. I wish I was, the old warrior replied. But that was just the beginning. The first battle taught me that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong. The humans did not fight like any species we had encountered before. They fought like something else entirely. He sat back down and picked up his glass with his. Good hand. They fought like the apex predators they truly are. Zexthara took another drink and continued his story. The cadets leaned closer, drawn in despite their doubts about what the old warrior was telling them. The Catherian's compound eyes reflected the bar lights as he remembered that first terrible encounter with human forces. The Kepler colony sat on 7 small moons around a gas giant, he began, rich in rare metals that both our species needed for starship construction. Our intelligence report said the human settlement was new, maybe 6 months old. A few mining platforms and basic defenses. Nothing that should trouble an experienced military force. He paused to let that sink in. We approached the system in standard formation. Fast attack ships in front, heavy cruisers providing support fire, troop transports protected in the center. The same tactics that had won us victories against the Zilani Rebellion and the Hydrax border wars. Proven methods that had never failed. U.S., the Zilani cadet shifted uncomfortably at the mention of his people's defeat. Zexthara noticed but continued without comment. The first sign that something was wrong came when we reached the outer sensor range. Our scanner showed the mining platforms exactly where they should be, but no defensive ships. No orbital weapons. No military installations at all. Just civilian miners going about their daily work. Zexthara's mandibles clicked slowly. Captain Jake Morrison was the human commander. We intercepted his communications later and learned he had only 97 soldiers under his command. 97 against our 2,000. Our tactical computers calculated a victory probability of 99.8%. The Hydrax. Cadet made a dismissive sound. Those odds seem reasonable for such a small force. Yes, they did, the old warrior agreed. Which is why what happened next caught us completely off guard. As we moved into attack formation, the human mining platforms suddenly stopped working. All of them at exactly the same moment. Our sensors showed the miners evacuating to underground shelters. He gestured with one of his good arms. This should have been the moment when their defense fleet appeared to protect them. Instead, nothing happened. The system seemed completely empty except for our forces and some abandoned mining equipment. The Morthan frowned through his thick fur. They abandoned their colonies? That shows weakness, not strength. Zexthara's laugh was not pleasant. That is what we thought too. Admiral Krath ordered the first wave to land and secure the primary mining facility. 300 soldiers in full battle armor supported by heavy assault vehicles. The best trained shock troops in the Catherian military. The cantina remained silent as the old soldier remembered. They landed without opposition. No defensive? Fire, no resistance at all. The mining facility appeared deserted. Our soldiers began securing the perimeter while engineers moved in to assess the equipment. Everything seemed to be going exactly as planned. He took a long drink before continuing. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan was Morrison's second in command. Later, intelligence reports told us she had trained with something called Marine Special Operations before joining the Colonial Defense Force. At the time, we had no idea what that meant. Their crystalline plates on his chest caught the light as he leaned forward. The attack came at sunset on the first day. Our soldiers were setting up defensive positions around the main facility when the humans struck. But they did not attack like any military force we had ever encountered. Zexthara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They did not charge at our positions or try to overwhelm us with superior firepower. Instead, they simply appeared. One moment our perimeter guards were reporting all clear, the next moment those guards were gone. No distress calls, no sounds of battle, they just vanished. The cadets exchanged uncertain glances. This was not the kind of warfare they had learned about in their military academies. Captain Morrison's voice came over our intercepted communications, the Catherian continued. He was not shouting orders or demanding surrender. He was speaking quietly to his soldiers, giving them directions in a calm, patient tone. Like a hunter explaining to his pack how to corner dangerous prey. He gestured to the scars on his chest. The humans had studied our equipment, our tactics, our psychology. They knew exactly how Catherians react to threats. We cluster together for mutual support. We rely on our superior technology and firepower. We fight with honor and expect our enemies to do the same. The old warrior's eyes grew distant. Morrison's soldiers used none of those assumptions against us. They did not try to match our firepower or challenge us to honorable combat. Instead, they hunted us. Individual soldiers would appear just long enough to eliminate one of our troops, then disappear before we could respond. They moved through terrain we thought was impossible to traverse, used our own communication frequencies to spread false information, and turned our advanced sensors against us by feeding them false readings. The Zelani cadet shook his head. Surely your superior numbers and equipment gave you an advantage. That is what we believed, Zexthara replied. But the humans had turned our advantages into weaknesses. Our heavy armor made noise when we moved, so they could track us from great distances. Our energy weapons created bright flashes that gave away our positions. Our group tactics meant that when they eliminated one soldier, they knew exactly where the others would be. He pointed to a particularly deep scar on his arm. Lieutenant Sullivan gave me this wound during the third day of fighting. One had taken a squad to investigate reports of human activity near the processing plant. We found what appeared to be evidence of their presence, the equipment they had abandoned in their hurry to escape. His mandibles clicked in bitter amusement. It was all carefully planned. The equipment was bait, placed exactly where our tactical doctrine said we should investigate. Sullivan and her soldiers had been waiting for hours, completely motionless, for us to follow our predictable patterns. The bar patrons leaned closer as the old soldier described the ambush. They attacked from 6 different directions simultaneously, but not to destroy us. Instead, they wounded several of my soldiers, and then withdrew before we could organize a proper response. We had to evacuate our wounded, which split our forces and gave them more opportunities to strike. Zexthara finished his drink and signaled for another. By the end of the first week, we had lost nearly half our landing force and accomplished none of our objectives. The humans had not captured any of our soldiers or seized any of our equipment. They had simply made it impossible for us to function as a military unit. The new drink arrived, glowing the same eerie blue as the first. That was when I began to understand that we were not fighting another military force. We were being hunted by something far more dangerous than we had ever encountered before. The blue liquid in Zexthara's glass swirled as he set it down carefully on the table. His damaged arm moved stiffly as he adjusted his position, the old injury still causing him pain after all these years. The 3 cadets waited silently for him to continue, no longer making jokes about human weakness. After 2 weeks of losses, command sent reinforcements, the old warrior said. Admiral Krath arrived with the battle cruiser Domination and 3 full battalions of elite soldiers. He also brought specialists trained in hunting guerrilla fighters and equipment designed to track enemies in any environment. The Hydrax cadet leaned forward eagerly. Surely that changed the balance of the battle. Zexthara's compound eyes fixed on the young alien. The Admiral was confident that superior numbers and technology would solve our problems. He deployed sensor networks that could detect a single heartbeat from orbit, hunter-killer teams with the best tracking equipment in the galaxy, and orbital Bombardment platforms that could level entire city blocks with pinpoint accuracy. He paused to take a sip of his drink. What we learned instead was that humans had weaponized something far more dangerous than technology. They had weaponized themselves. The Morthan's furry face showed confusion. What do you mean? Sergeant Danny Cruz commanded the human special operations team that Krath brought his best hunters to eliminate, Zexthara explained. Intelligence reports we captured later showed that Cruz had been born on a world called Earth in a place they called Detroit. He had spent his childhood in urban warfare zones before joining their military. His partner, Corporal Lisa Park, came from the mountains of a region called Colorado, where her family had hunted dangerous predators for generations. The old Catherian gestured with his good hand. Both of them were what humans call normal. No genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, no special equipment beyond basic military gear. But they possessed something that no other species in the galaxy had developed. They were persistence hunters. The Zelani cadet looked puzzled. I do not understand this term. Most predators in the galaxy rely on speed, strength, or special abilities to catch their prey, Zexthara explained. They make quick strikes and either succeed immediately or give up to conserve energy. Humans evolved differently. They developed the ability to pursue their targets for days or even weeks without stopping, gradually wearing them down until the prey could no longer resist. He pointed to his scarred chest. Cruz and Park tracked my elite hunter teams across 3 different moons for 6 days straight. They did not need to move faster than us or fight us directly. They simply followed us everywhere we went, never stopping, never resting, always staying just close enough to remind us they were there. The cantina had grown so quiet that the sound of alien breathing seemed loud. Zexthara continued his story, in the same calm voice he might use to discuss the weather. My soldiers began to crack under the pressure. These were veterans who had fought in a dozen campaigns without showing fear, but something about being constantly hunted by humans broke their spirits. They stopped sleeping properly, jumped at every sound, and made mistakes that got their teammates killed. He took another drink before continuing. The humans used this psychological advantage ruthlessly. Park would leave evidence of their presence in places my soldiers thought were secure. A footprint in the mud near our camps, equipment moved just slightly from where we had left it, or scratches on rocks that showed they had been watching us from positions we thought were impossible to reach. The Hydrax cadet shifted uncomfortably. Surely your technology could track them. That was what we believed, Zexthara replied. But the humans had studied our equipment more carefully than we had studied them. They knew exactly how our sensors worked and what limitations they had. Cruz and Park moved through our detection networks like shadows, always staying just outside our scanning range or using natural features to mask their heat signatures. The old warrior's mandibles clicked slowly as he remembered. What made it worse was their patience. Most species attack when they have an advantage or retreat when they do not. Humans do neither. They wait. They can remain completely motionless for hours or even days, watching and learning, until the perfect moment arrives. He gestured to a scar on his neck. Park gave me this wound during the 4th week of the campaign. I had taken my remaining soldiers to what we thought was a secure position on the highest peak of the 3rd moon. Our scanner showed no life signs within 50 kilometers, and we had clear lines of sight in every direction. The Zelani cadet leaned closer. How did she reach you? She had been there for 3 days before we arrived, Zexthara said simply. Buried under rocks and debris, breathing through a tiny air tube, moving only when absolutely necessary. She had studied our patrol patterns and predicted exactly where we would set up our defensive position. The old Catherian touched the scar gently. When she finally moved, it was not to kill me. She could have easily put a blade through my throat while I slept. Instead, she left me this small cut and a message written in my own language carved into the rock beside my head. The Morthan's voice was barely a whisper. What did the message say? We know where you are, Zexthara quoted from memory. We know what you are planning. We know how many soldiers you have left. Surrender now, and we will let you leave with honor." He finished his drink in one long swallow. That was when I realized we were not fighting soldiers like ourselves. We were facing something that evolution had specifically designed to hunt and kill other intelligent beings. Humans were not just good at warfare. They were the ultimate predators, and we had become their prey. The three cadets sat in stunned silence. Around them, the cantina remained quiet as other patrons absorbed the implications of what they had heard. Species that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years were being described as helpless victims. "The worst part," Zexthara continued, "was that the humans seemed to enjoy it. Not in a cruel way, but with the satisfaction of craftsmen practicing their art. Cruz and Park hunted us with the same focus and dedication that other beings might use to create beautiful music or solve complex mathematical problems." He signaled for another drink. They were not angry at us for invading their territory. They were not fighting for revenge or conquest. They hunted us because hunting was what they were born to do, and we had made ourselves available as targets. The bartender, a nervous Regalian with 6 arms, brought the glowing blue liquid with hands that shook slightly. Even the staff had been listening to the old warrior's tale. "How did it end?" the Hydrax cadet asked quietly. Zexthara picked up his fresh drink but did not taste it immediately. Admiral Croth finally accepted that conventional tactics would not work against humans. He decided to bombard the entire moon system from orbit and eliminate both the human defenders and their mining facilities. Better to destroy the resources than let them fall into enemy hands. The old soldier's voice grew even quieter. That was when the humans revealed their final secret. Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Sullivan had not been trying to hold territory or protect equipment. They had been keeping us busy while their real forces prepared for battle. He looked directly at each cadet in turn. The 97 defenders we had been fighting for a month were not their entire military force. They were just the bait in a trap that was about to close around the entire Catherian fleet. Zexthara stared into his drink for a long moment before speaking again. The crystalline plates of his armor caught the light differently now, seeming darker somehow as he remembered the events that followed. The 3 cadets waited nervously, beginning to understand that this story would not have the ending they had expected. Admiral Croth ordered the orbital bombardment to begin at dawn on the 32nd day of the campaign, the old warrior said. Every ship in our fleet moved into position around the target moon. Weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto the human positions. We thought the war was finally over. He took a small sip of his blue drink. The attack never came. At precisely 0600 hours, our sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from the edge of the system. A human battle fleet had arrived, commanded by Colonel Ryan Hayes and Major Amy Chun. 23 ships against our 47. Under normal circumstances, we would have destroyed them easily. The Zelani cadet looked confused. What made these circumstances different? The humans had been watching us for weeks through sensors we never detected, Zexthara explained. They knew exactly where each of our ships was positioned, what weapons we carried, how our tactical computers calculated firing solutions, and what our standard response patterns would be for any given situation. The old Catherian's mandibles clicked slowly. More importantly, they had studied how we react as individuals and as a military organization. Catherians are proud warriors who value honor above efficiency. We fight as individuals who happen to be working together, each seeking personal glory. In battle, he gestured with his damaged arm. Humans fight as something else entirely. They are pack hunters who share a collective consciousness during combat. When Colonel Hayes gave an order, his entire fleet responded as if they were all part of the same organism. The Morthan leaned forward, his thick fur bristling with nervous energy. Surely your superior numbers and firepower gave you an advantage. That is what Admiral Croth believed, Zexthara replied. He ordered a standard engagement pattern, with our heavy cruisers providing covering fire while our destroyers moved in for close combat. Proven tactics that had won us victories against every other species we had encountered. The old warrior paused to let the suspense build. The human response was unlike anything in our tactical databases. Instead of meeting our attack head-on, or attempting to withdraw to a better position, they scattered their ships across the entire system in what appeared to be a panicked retreat. He touched one of the deeper scars on his chest. Our pursuit lasted 3 hours. Every time we thought we had cornered a human ship, it would slip away using maneuvers that should have been impossible. Their vessels moved like they were alive, anticipating our attacks and responding faster than our computers could calculate. The Hydrax cadet shook his blue-scaled head. They must have had superior technology. No, Zexthara said firmly. Intelligence reports we captured later showed that human ships were actually inferior to ours in most respects. Slower engines, weaker shields, less powerful weapons, but they used what they had with an efficiency that seemed supernatural. The cantina remained completely silent as the old soldier continued. The first sign that something was wrong came when our formation began to spread out across the system. Admiral Krath was so focused on destroying the fleeing humans that he did not notice how far apart our ships had become. By the time our tactical officers realized what was happening, it was too late to regroup. Zexthara took a longer drink before continuing. Major Chun had been leading our forces into carefully prepared kill zones, while Colonel Hayes positioned the main human fleet for a coordinated strike. The scattered retreat had been an illusion designed to separate our ships and eliminate our numerical advantage. The old Catherian's voice grew quieter. When the humans finally revealed their true positions, we discovered that they had surrounded individual groups of our ships with overwhelming local superiority. Instead of fighting 23 ships against 47, we were fighting 7. Separate battles where the humans outnumbered us 2 or 3 to 1. He gestured with his good hand to illustrate the tactical situation. But even that was not the worst part. The worst part was watching how human crews worked together during combat. Our ships were crewed by individuals who followed orders and did their assigned jobs. Human ships were crewed by beings who seemed to share the same mind. The Zelani cadet looked puzzled. What do you mean? When Colonel Hayes was wounded during the first engagement, something changed in the entire human fleet, Zexthara explained. Major Chun did not just take command of his ship. She somehow took command of every human in the battle. Their response patterns became more aggressive, their coordination became perfect, and their tactical decisions became unpredictable. The old warrior touched his neck scar gently. Later analysis showed that human communication protocols during the battle included information streams that our experts could not decode. They were sharing data at a level that went beyond simple military coordination. They were functioning as a single organism with 23 different bodies. He paused to let that concept sink in. The engagement lasted 14 hours. By the end, Admiral Krath had lost 31 ships and over 12,000 soldiers. The human fleet suffered damage to 6 ships and lost fewer than 200. Crew members, the Morthan's voice was barely audible. How is that possible? Humans had weaponized their most basic evolutionary advantage, Zexthara said. On their homeworld, they had evolved as pack hunters who could coordinate their actions through subtle communication methods that other species could not detect or understand. In space combat, this gave them abilities that seemed almost telepathic. The old Catherian finished his drink and set the empty glass on the table. But the most terrifying moment came after the battle was over. Colonel Hayes, despite his injuries, personally contacted Admiral Krath to offer surrender terms. The 3 cadets leaned forward eagerly. This was not how they expected a human victory to end. The humans offered to let our surviving ships leave. The system unharmed if we agreed never to return, Zexthara continued. They would keep our prisoners safe and return them through neutral channels within 30 days. They asked for no tribute, no reparations, no territorial concessions. They simply wanted us to leave and never come back. He looked directly at each cadet. Admiral Krath was so confused by this offer that he asked Colonel Hayes to explain their terms more clearly. The human response was something that still gives me nightmares. The cantina seemed to hold its breath as the old warrior spoke his next words. Hayes said that humans did not fight for conquest or resources or glory. They fought to protect their pack and eliminate threats to their territory. Since we were no longer a threat, they had no reason to continue killing us. Zexthara signaled the bartender for another drink. He explained that destroying our remaining ships would be easy, but also wasteful. Better to let us return home and warn other species about what would happen if they chose to threaten human colonies. The blue liquid arrived quickly, the nervous Rigelian bartender clearly eager to hear the rest of the story. That was when I realized that the entire month-long campaign had been a learning experience for the humans. They had not been fighting desperately to defend their territory. They had been studying us, testing our capabilities, and developing tactics that could be used against other species who might threaten them in the future. The old soldier took a sip of his fresh drink. We had not lost a battle to the humans. We had been used as training targets by predators who were preparing to take their place as the dominant species in the galaxy. The cantina had grown colder somehow, as if the old warrior's words had drained the warmth from the air. Zexthara held his glass with both good hands, the blue liquid casting strange shadows across his scarred features. The three cadets sat, frozen in their chairs, no longer the confident young soldiers who had approached his table hours earlier. The defeat at Kepler should have ended the war, Zexthara said quietly. Admiral Krath returned to the homeworld with barely a third of his fleet intact, carrying reports that the High Command refused to believe. Humans were just mammals, they insisted. Primitive creatures who had barely learned to travel between stars. One defeat meant nothing. He took a slow sip before continuing. Within 6 months, the Catherian Empire had assembled the largest military force in our history. The Grand Fleet contained over 300 ships, 50,000 of our best soldiers, and weapons that could crack the crust of a planet. General Steve Martinez and Admiral Grace Thompson commanded the human forces that stood against us. The Zilani cadets' green skin had paled to an unhealthy shade. Surely such overwhelming force could not be defeated by a small human fleet. The humans brought 67 ships to the final battle, Zexthara replied. Our intelligence estimated their total force at fewer than 15,000 personnel. Our tactical computers calculated victory odds of 99.9%. The High Command was so confident that they broadcast the battle live across the Empire as a demonstration of Catherian superiority. The old warrior's compound eyes reflected the bar lights like broken glass. The engagement began exactly as our war planners had predicted. Our heavy battleships moved into bombardment range, while fighter squadrons swept ahead to clear any defensive positions. The humans seemed to panic, breaking formation and scattering their ships across multiple sectors. He gestured with his damaged arm. For the first 3 hours, everything went according to plan. We destroyed several human ships and forced the rest into defensive positions among the asteroid fields where they could not use their superior maneuverability. Victory seemed assured. The Morthan leaned forward nervously. What changed? The humans began to adapt, Zexthara said simply. Not just their tactics or their formations, but their entire approach to warfare. They were learning and evolving during the battle itself in ways that should have been impossible. The old Catherian paused to let that concept sink in. General Martinez commanded the human ground forces that had been deployed to the orbital stations around the primary planet. His troops were trapped with no possibility of retreat, facing assault forces that outnumbered them 10-1. He touched the deepest scar on his chest. I led the attack on Station 7, where Martinez had positioned his command center. Our assault began with a standard orbital bombardment followed by a massive infantry deployment. The same tactics that had crushed every enemy we had ever faced. The cantina remained silent except for the quiet sounds of alien breathing. Even the background music had stopped playing, leaving only the old warrior's voice to break the tension. Martinez's soldiers responded to our attack patterns in ways that defied explanation, Zexthara continued. They seemed to know exactly where our troops would land before we had even chosen our landing zones. Their defensive positions were perfectly designed to counter weapons they should never have seen before. He took another drink, his movements careful and deliberate. But that was only the beginning. As the battle progressed, the human defenders began to modify their tactics in real time based on what they observed about our capabilities. They were not just adapting to our strategy, they were evolving beyond it. The Hydrax cadet shook his blue-scaled head in disbelief. How is such rapid adaptation possible? Humans possess something that no other species in the galaxy has developed, Zexthara explained. They can compress evolutionary adaptation into the span of a single battle. What takes other species thousands of years to develop through natural selection, humans can achieve in hours through conscious learning and modification. The old soldier gestured to illustrate his point. My assault troops carried energy weapons that had never failed against any known armor. Within 2 hours of the first engagement, Martinez's soldiers had developed countermeasures that made our weapons nearly useless. They studied the energy patterns, analyzed the beam characteristics, and created defensive techniques that neutralized our technological advantage. He paused to take a sip of his drink. Admiral Thompson demonstrated the same capability with her fleet actions. Our ships had been designed to fight enemies who used predictable formation patterns and standard tactical doctrines. Thompson's forces abandoned every conventional approach to space combat and invented new methods of warfare during the battle itself. The Zilani cadet's voice was barely a whisper. What kind of new methods? They began using their own ships as weapons, Zexthara replied. Not ramming attacks or suicide runs, but coordinated maneuvers that turned individual vessels into components of larger tactical systems. Thompson would sacrifice a destroyer to position 2 cruisers for a perfect attack run or use a damaged ship as bait to lure our forces into ambush positions. The old Kytherian's mandibles clicked slowly as he remembered, but the most disturbing aspect was how quickly they learned to counter our psychological warfare techniques. Kytherians have spent centuries developing methods to break enemy morale through fear and intimidation. The humans not only resisted these approaches, they seemed to become stronger when faced with overwhelming odds. He touched his neck scar. Gently, during the assault on Station 7, my soldiers began to break under the pressure of fighting an enemy that kept changing its tactics faster than we could respond. These were veterans who had never shown fear in combat, but something about fighting humans destroyed their confidence. The Morthan's thick fur bristled with nervous energy. How did the battle end? It ended when we realized that continuing the fight would only teach the humans more about our capabilities, Zexthara said quietly. After 18 hours of combat, General Martinez and Admiral Thompson had developed countermeasures for every weapon in our arsenal, defensive techniques that neutralized our tactical advantages, and attack patterns that exploited weaknesses. We did not know we had. The old warrior finished his drink and set the empty glass on the table with a sharp click. The humans were not just winning the battle. They were using us as a learning laboratory to prepare for conflicts with other species who might threaten them in the future. He looked directly at each cadet in turn. High Command ordered a full retreat when they realized that every minute we continued fighting was making the humans more dangerous to the entire galaxy. We were watching the birth of a new apex species, and our own destruction was providing the education they needed to claim that position. The cantina remained completely silent as the implications of his words sank in. Zexthara signaled for another drink, his movements slow and deliberate. The most terrifying part was the message that Admiral Thompson sent to our fleet as we withdrew from the system. The 3 cadets waited breathlessly for him to continue. She thanked us for the valuable training exercise and wished us a safe journey home, the old warrior said. Then she added that the human military would be incorporating the lessons learned from our engagement into their standard tactical databases, and that other species considering aggressive actions against human territories might want to review the battle recordings before making their final decisions. He accepted his fresh drink from the nervous Rigelian bartender. That was when I understood that the entire war had been nothing more than an advanced education program for the humans. They had not been fighting to defend their colonies or protect their resources. They had been learning how to destroy any species in the galaxy that might pose a threat to their expansion. Zexthara lifted his glass with trembling hands, the blue liquid catching the dim cantina lights as he prepared to finish his tale. The three cadets sat motionless in their chairs, their earlier confidence completely shattered by what they had learned. Around them, the other patrons remained silent, understanding that they were witnessing the end of an era in galactic history. The retreat from human space marked the beginning of the end for Catherian military dominance, the old warrior said quietly. Within days of our return, intelligence reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Every major species had received detailed recordings of our battles with human forces, along with tactical analyses that showed exactly how the humans had achieved victory. He took a small sip before continuing. The recordings had been sent by Admiral Thompson herself, with a simple message attached to each transmission. Any species considering military action against human colonies should carefully review the educational materials provided and consider whether such actions serve their long-term survival interests. The Zilani cadet's green skin had taken on an unhealthy pale shade. She was threatening the entire galaxy? No, Zexthara replied, his mandibles clicking slowly. She was educating it. The humans were not making threats or demanding submission. They were simply demonstrating their capabilities and allowing other species to draw their own conclusions about the wisdom of aggressive actions. The old Catherian gestured with his good arm. Within weeks, the Council of Worlds received formal applications from 3 human colonies requesting membership in the galactic community. These same colonies had been considered primitive outposts just months earlier. Now they were being courted by species that had dominated space for millennia. He paused to let the irony sink in. The applications included detailed proposals for military cooperation agreements, technology sharing protocols, and defensive alliance structures. The humans were not asking to join galactic civilization as junior partners. They were offering to protect it as its new guardians. The Morthan's voice was barely audible through his thick fur. What did the council decide? The vote for full human membership was unanimous, Zexthara said. Every species representative, including my own government, agreed that cooperation with humans was preferable to the alternative. We had all seen what happened to forces that chose confrontation. The old warrior touched his deepest scar gently. But membership was only the beginning. Within a year, human military advisors were stationed with every major fleet in the galaxy. Human tactical doctrines became standard training materials at military academies. Human officers served as consultants for species that had been fighting wars since before humanity learned to use fire. He took another drink, his movements careful and deliberate. The transition was not forced or demanded. It simply happened naturally as other species recognized the reality of their situation. Humans had become the apex predators of the galaxy, and survival meant learning to work with them rather than against them. The Hydrax cadet shook his scaled head in disbelief. Surely some species resisted this change. The Vorthan Empire attempted to maintain their independence, Zexthara replied. They commanded the largest fleet in the Outer Rim territories and had never been defeated in conventional warfare. Their military leaders believed that human tactics would not work against Vorthan discipline and technology. The cantina seemed to grow colder as the old soldier continued. The conflict lasted exactly 73 hours. Human forces under the command of something called a Special Operations Division eliminated the entire Vorthan military without destroying a single civilian target or capturing any territory. He gestured to emphasize his point. The humans did not conquer the Vorthan Empire. They simply removed its ability to threaten anyone else. Vorthan colonies continued to operate normally, their government remained in power, and their citizens. EXPERIENCED, no disruption to their daily lives. Only their military capability had been erased. The old Catherian's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The message was clear to every species in the galaxy. Humans would not rule through conquest or intimidation. They would simply ensure that no other species possessed the ability to threaten galactic stability. The Zilani cadet leaned forward nervously. What about species that had never shown aggressive tendencies? Those species prospered under human protection, Zexthara explained. Trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for centuries became completely safe. Border disputes that had lasted for generations were resolved through human mediation. Scientific research that had been limited by military concerns expanded rapidly under human security guarantees. He took a longer drink before continuing. But the most significant change was in how warfare itself evolved. The old model of massive fleets and planetary bombardments became obsolete overnight. Human military doctrine focused on precision, efficiency, and minimal collateral damage. The old warrior gestured with his damaged arm. Wars that might have killed billions of civilians in previous eras were now resolved through targeted actions that eliminated only military threats. The humans had not just become the galaxy's apex predators, they had become its most efficient peacekeepers. The Morthan's thick fur bristled with nervous energy. But what about the future? Will humans always remain dominant? Zexthara's compound eyes reflected the bar lights as he considered the question. That depends on whether other species can learn to evolve as quickly as humans do. The key to human success is not their technology or their natural abilities. It is their capacity for rapid adaptation and improvement. He finished his drink and set the empty glass on the table. Every species in the galaxy is now trying to understand and replicate human learning methods. Some have made progress, but none have achieved the same level of evolutionary flexibility. Humans continue to advance faster than anyone else can follow. The old Catherian stood slowly, his movements stiff from old injuries and too many hours of sitting. But perhaps that is for the best. The galaxy has never been more peaceful or more prosperous than it is under human guidance. Wars have become rare, trade has expanded beyond all previous levels, and scientific advancement has accelerated dramatically. The three cadets remained seated, still processing everything they had learned. Zexthara looked down at them with something that might have been sympathy. "You asked me to tell you about human weakness," he said quietly. "What I have shown you instead is that humans have no weaknesses that matter in the context of galactic politics. They have transformed every apparent disadvantage into a strategic asset and turned every challenge into an opportunity for growth." He began to walk away from the table, then paused and turned back. "But I will leave you with one final observation that should give you hope for your own species' future." The cadets looked up at him expectantly. The humans I have encountered, from Captain Morrison to Admiral Thompson, all shared one crucial characteristic. They genuinely wanted to protect and nurture other species rather than dominate or exploit them. Zexthara's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. Humans are apex predators, but they are also pack animals who extend their protective instincts to species that prove themselves worthy of trust and cooperation. Learn to work with them honestly and openly, and you will find that no force in the galaxy is more reliable or more generous. He walked toward the cantina exit, his crystalline armor catching the lights one final time. Remember this conversation when you graduate from your academies and begin your military careers. The galaxy belongs to humanity now, but there is room in their pack for species wise enough to recognize that reality and embrace it. The old warrior reached the door and paused for one last moment. We did not lose a war to the humans. We encountered our replacement as the galaxy's apex predators, and we were fortunate they chose to let us live. With those words, Commander, Zexthara stepped into the corridor and disappeared into the crowds of Meridian Prime, leaving three very different cadets to contemplate a future they had never imagined possible.